Hello everyone, welcome to this week's lecture. So before we get started, I like to remind you that the exam 2 is available. So it'll be open until Friday 11:55 p.m. So I suggest that you take it at least on Thursday night, which is at the latest, so that if anything happens, you have a day to fix that problem. Alright, that is that. So I uploaded a study guide review. I understand that G section class did not meet last week, but I don't think that really applies to us because we're an online class. So, well, anyway, let's get started. So this week is going to be, I want to keep it a little bit minimal because I want you guys to have some time to study for the exam. So this is going to be a short video going over different types of the printmaking and how it works and then the process of it. So printmaking is really hard to explain all the process and how it works. You really kind of have to be there and then see watch an artist make a print using all these chemicals and going through all this process, because like I mentioned last lecture, printmaking is very process heavy medium of art, meaning that to make an art there's a lot of process that goes into, and there's a lot of science behind it as well. So this week we're going to be watching a lot of video on different techniques of printmaking. So yeah, let's get started. So this week's lecture, we're gonna talk about these 4 points: describe relief printmaking process, intaglio printmaking, and also lithography, planographic printmaking process, and also a stencil printmaking process, which is commonly used stencil technique is screen printing. So we're gonna take a look at these 4. So printmaking is relatively unfamiliar form of art to most people. But they do not know that they see it every day and everywhere. So if you have ever accidentally tracked mud into the house in your sneakers, then you probably understand the basic principle of making a print. So a pigment or substance, in this case mud, is transferred from its original place outside to a support or a floor, in this case, thus making a mark. So if you repeat that in the same action over and over and again, you'll be able to produce multiple identical marks just by stepping back to the mud and then making a mark on the floor. I mean, someone's gonna get mad at you at your house, but anyway. So this is the unique characteristic of printmaking, except for monotype, which we're going to be talking about it later. So you can create identical multiples relatively easily. Notice why I'm saying relatively, because you will see that there is a lot of process that goes in for the printmaking, and so that is the unique characteristic, making identical multiples, unlike other forms of art such as painting and sculpture, where if you want to make a copy, you're gonna have to make another one practically, and it is not going to be identical. I mean, you could make it identical, but not at same degree as the printmaking. So the process of printmaking varies, and it is very different from art forms that we are used to, such as painting. So I think last lecture we looked at this video on going over 4 different techniques of printmaking. So let's just skip that. Alright, so this week let's geek out on some technical terms of printmaking. So I think we looked at this, but I like to just review because last week it was kind of I had to end the lecture in the middle of while I was talking about the printmaking. So let's take a look at this again. So printmaking is probably one of the most process-intense art form, meaning that there is a lot of science and different techniques involved in making an artwork. So in this lecture, we're going to watch a lot of video on different techniques, since I think it is almost impossible to explain all this in words, and it'll be much better for you to actually see, well, at least through the screen, and how different techniques of printmaking works. So first important term that we need to know is the matrix. So matrix is a physical surface that can be manipulated to hold ink, which is then transferred to a support or paper. Common material for matrix are wood, copper, stone, and linoleum, and rubber, and things like that. So I think this is linoleum, I believe, or rubber. So different type of matrix are what gives each printmaking process a name, such as woodcut, which is, use matrix is wood. Lithography, so do you guys remember the monolith from the chapter 1? Lith in Latin means rock, so lithography is actually drawing on a rock. And etching, which is you technically grab like a sharp tool and then you etch on the copper, usually metal plates such as copper and brass and things like that. So matrix is really important. So this is something that you'll be spending a lot of time when you're making when you're printmaking. And next is press. So once matrix is finished and inked, oftentimes printmakers use a press to transfer the ink from matrix to a support. So press is any kind of a mechanical device for applying even pressure to an ink surface resting upon a printed medium. So there are many different types of press out there, but one of the most common one is this kind of a stainless roller press. It seems very innocent, but this is one of the most dangerous tools you can use, because if you put your hand right over here and then you just start rolling this, your finger might get caught in there, and then there's a lot of pressure applied here. So this is very dangerous, and it is not a good way to lose a finger. So you just gotta be careful not to have anything, not to have your hand on this print bed right here while you're engaging this in the lever. Seen that happening, so it's not fun. Or another type of press they can use is like I said, anything that can apply even pressure to a flat surface can be used as a press. So in this case, a steam roller, which is commonly used for like a road construction, just leveling out the concrete, can also be used to print large scale print like this. Of course, they have to turn off the steam function. They are only using this kind of this roller to apply this even press to the matrix right over here. So if you ever go to like a school that has like a printmaking program, they most of them hold like a annual steam roller event where they invite the community to bring like a large matrix to print on large scale. They rent out like a steam roller and then allow students to actually drive this thing. So if you have a driver license, apparently, if you have in North Carolina, if you have a regular driver license, you can you can drive this. I was so surprised that they will allow students to drive this relatively intimidating looking machinery. But anyway, alrighty. So first technique of 4 major classes of printmaking is relief. So the term relief describes any printing method in which the image to be printed is raised from a background. So the most common case would be this type of a rubber stamp. The reversed raised letter standing out from the background is pressed to an ink pad and then transferred to a paper to make a mark. And then by repeating that, you can create a multiple identical mark. So as you can see in this diagram, it shows that how raised platform is inked, but whereas this cut into places doesn't receive any ink, resulting in this type of mark making. So all relief process work according to this general principle as seen in this illustration. So let's take a look at relief.
Relief printmaking's origins started in hand printing, meaning no press was required. You were able, as an artist or a commercial printer printing text, able to transfer the image by hand by use of a baren. A baren is a small object that allows you to apply even pressure larger than that of your hand. In this case, the block has been inked. and a thin sheet of paper is laid over top of the block. With gentle pressure applied to the block, you can transfer the ink to the sheet of paper. A baren is typically used on thin sheets of paper. The heavier weight papers that most artists use today are too thick for our hand to be able to apply pressure all the way through that sheet for an even transfer of the image. You can check the impression to ensure you've got a cool, even pull. Woodcuts use a flat piece of wood. In the case that we'll demonstrate today, it will be a cabinet-grade plywood, which is extremely dimensionally stable, but still has a beautiful grain. And the grain of the wood in woodcut is one reason that artists utilize the material. The grain provides a different effect in the black areas of the print, in contrast to something like linoleum cuts, where the black areas are totally flat. In a woodcut, the grain will affect just how heavily black the black areas of the print can be printed. The grain has a visual effect that can often be used to an artist's advantage. When cutting on a wood block, you use a different set of tools, much similar to that of a wood carver or a cabinet maker. These tools provide the artist the opportunity to have a variety of marks, widths, and depths from which to work with. In relief printmaking, a woodcut block is prepared first by toning the block with an India ink wash or a wash of a jet black film ink. This provides a black ground on the surface from which to easily see the removed areas of wood to reveal the drawing in a way that allows the artist to understand what is happening and where their drawing is going. Once the block has been stained or toned, the drawing can be transferred through with the aid of an iron oxide or carbon paper transfer. Once that paper transfer has been made, the artist now has the choice of deciding which form of white line or black line composition to utilize. White line is revealing the image through thin white lines in a black field. That would be cutting away those white lines to leave the upper area or black field to take ink. The opposite way of approaching the image area is what we call black line, which is removing the majority of the information or wood to reveal thin, raised black lines to accept the ink for transfer to paper. It is the balance of white line and black line that creates a sense of depth or three-dimensionality. Often an artist will have a shift of white line to black line to be able to reveal a more representational or dimensional space. Once the image has been cut into the block is prepared for printing. Ink is rolled over the surface of the block, placed on the press, and passed through, transferring ink to paper. Linoleum block printing, or linocut, is a form of relief printmaking. It relies on linoleum, very much similar to what would be in someone's home, a linoleum tile, as being a very flat, consistent surface that you can gouge away the non-image area. Linoleum block prints provide a very specific look, which would be something that has a very flat black area. The type of linoleum block printmaking that we do today is very affordable and accessible. The materials are easy to use and easy for people to begin understanding the basic concepts of printmaking. Because of its affordability and ease of use, it can be used by a variety of different people all across the world to have a very quick transfer of an idea to a block that can then be replicated through printmaking. Approaching a linoleum block print is very similar to that in approaching that of a woodcut. The material of itself can be toned just like a wood block is toned to provide a black ground so that it makes it easier to see what it is that you're cutting. Linoleum in and of itself in a material does not necessarily need that because it's fairly easy to see what it is that you're doing. You can lay out your drawing ahead of time with a marker or also a carbon or iron oxide transfer. In this case, I will approach the block with the material blank and develop the image as I go. Also, like a woodcut, if I remove material, it cannot be replaced. Whatever I cut away will be white. Whatever remains will be black. The tools we use for linoleum cuts are very similar to those of a woodcut. The difference is the type of metal that's used. Linoleum is a much softer material and does not dull the tools nearly as quickly as wood dulls the tools. So a high carbon steel is not necessarily required for doing a linoleum cut. You can see the different shapes here, a V-gouge and a U-tip, very similar to that of a woodcut. So these are the tools that we use for linoleum cuts, and the tools that we have for woodcut are very specific. Anything that can remove material is a tool that can be used. An artist may use a crowbar, a screwdriver, a nail, and all of these things that mark or mar the surface will provide image area. Once you've drawn a basic image on the linoleum block, you can begin cutting. In this case, I've used some simple text, but remembering that this will be printed in reverse. So everything on the block must be backwards. So for printing a relief block, that's a linoleum cut, it's the same approach as to printing a wood cut. We want an even application of ink across the entire block. But in this case, because the surface of the linoleum will print a flat black, we're ensuring that we make a very even application with no texture.
Oh, right, so that is relief pre-making. And next is intaglio. So intaglio, the second major category of pre-making technique, is distinguished by the fact that the ink forming the design is printed only from recessed area of the matrix. So this will be in reverse of the relief pre-making. So intaglio printing is the opposite of relief painting in that the printing is done from ink that is below the surface of the plate. The design is cut, scratched, or etched into the printing surface or plate, the matrix, which can be copper, zinc, aluminum, magnesium, plastic, or even coated paper, and things like that. So the printing ink is rubbed into the incision of grooves, and the surface is wiped clean after the ink is applied. So unlike surface printing, intaglio printing, which is actually a process of embossing the paper into the incised lines, it requires considerable pressure compared to the relief paintings and other things like that. So if you take a look at this illustration here, it shows that the difference between the relief painting, where a raised part is where it gets inked, but in intaglio technique, all the recessed part is where is holding the ink. And then you put a paper on top of it and then apply the pressure to stretch the paper into this recessed area, thus absorbing this small ink in there to make a print. Alright, so let's take a look at how etching is done.
Etching is a medium that is part of the intaglio process of printmaking processes. It consists of a metal plate to which an even ground is applied. The ground is a wax ground and acts as a resist for the subsequent etch. A drawing is made, a design is created into the ground, and this ground is then placed in a mordant bath, which used to be an acid such as a nitric or a hydrochloric acid, but now is very commonly a copper sulfate solution. Plates then removed from the etching solution, cleaned, dried, and the wax ground removed with a solvent. This should then reveal the drawn image etched into the plate, ready to be charged with ink.
So what we did here is the first, this thin layer, the wax substance that he put on, works as a resistance to this acid bath right here. So only place where he made a mark or scratched off this wax material, which will be these lines right here, is gonna get etched by this acid, because the place that he didn't etch, there's still wax remaining in there, working as a resistant to this acid. But the place where he made a mark by scratching into the metal is exposed to this acid, creating, so this acid is going to bite into that small line and then effectively making a recessed area. So that's how it is working here.
ground removed with a solvent.
And then he's gonna remove all this wax resistance with a solvent, so that he can get ready to he can get his plate ready to be printed.
Solvent. This should then reveal the drawn image etched into the plate, ready to be charged with ink. The plate is usually then placed onto a hot plate, a heated plate, that will allow the metal of the plate to warm up, which will make the ink that is subsequently forced into the lines, the etched lines of the plate, to become soft. Ink is evenly dragged across the surface of the plate and pushed down into the etched lines. The ink is then cleaned from the surface of the plate, leaving ink only in the recessed areas of the plate. The plate is then moved to a press, which will apply the pressure to allow the ink to be pulled from the lines and transferred to the paper. Usually this is done with some kind of registration template to allow you to work out where the plate will go on the bed of the press in relation to where the paper will then go. Prior to printing, the paper, which is usually a heavy watercolour type paper of around 250 grams or more, is soaked in a bath of water to prepare it ready for printing. This process allows the paper to become soft and therefore more likely to be pushed down into the etched lines of the plate from the pressure of the press. This paper is then transferred to the press, placed on top of the etching plate, and a set of felt blankets are then evenly placed on top of this. This is then wound through the press in a regular motion, an even motion. Pressure is applied through the blankets from the rollers onto the etching plate through the paper that has been placed in the press. Once this paper is lifted, it will reveal the subsequent etching. You'll notice that this print prints as a mirror of the drawing. The plate is then re-inked and subsequent prints are taken depending on the required number of prints that the artist wants. This is usually referred to as an addition, and you will very commonly see an addition mark usually on the left hand side of any print, which indicates the number of prints in the edition and the order of that particular print in that edition.
So that is how etching works, intaglio technique of printmaking. Alright, so next is planography. So planographic process means that the printing surface is flat, unlike the previous two techniques. So one of the example of this category of printmaking is lithography. So the name litho suggests, like we said, it's a stone. So in this case, let's use this special type of limestone. So this technique is solely dependent on the principle that the oil and water don't mix. So in litho, artists first use a greasy crayon and then treat it with acid solution, which bind the drawing to the stone. And once the procedure is completed, the stone is damped with water, which soaks into the area not coated with grease. So when stone is inked, only surface that is drawn with the greasy crayon accepts the ink, and the other is repelled by the water-soaked surface of the water. So and then you place a paper on top of it, and then put pressure on it, rub it on it, and then the print is made. So let's take a look at how lithography works.
Lithography works on the fact that grease and water repels each other. I think a good way of explaining is if you ever have dropped butter or oil in your kitchens and try to remove it with water, you know how the water just kind of fall on the edges of the grease. That's basically what makes lithography works. Lithography, you print traditionally from a lithography stone, which is a special kind of limestone that is taken from one quarry in Germany. The first step of the process is that you want to grain and level the stone so it's completely level and have a fine grit on it that you can draw on. When you start your drawing, you use a lithography crayon that have a grease content in them or a touche wash. You draw this on the stone and the artists create their artwork. When the drawing is done, you start to process the stone to prepare it for printing. The first step of processing your stone and preparing it for printing is called the first etch. What we want to do is to start the chemical process that prepare your stone to be printed. After you've drawn your image, the stone is still sensitive to grease, and we need to desensitize the stone. By using gum arabic and nitric acid, we will be starting the chemical process. You're applying gum arabic onto the stone, which together with the limestone creates a layer that we call absorbed gum layer. The gum arabic and the nitric acid will together help the grease from the drawing material get penetrated into the stone and create a greasy reservoir directly underneath your drawing. This is where your printmaking ink will hold on to, because grease and grease attract each other. After you've done your first etch, you want your stone to rest for at least an hour so that the grease can get settled into the stone. After you've been waiting and the stone been resting, we are going to start the second part of the processing of the stone, which is to wash out the drawing materials and replace them with the printmaking ink. In lithography, we use a special printmaking ink. The first step to do when you wash out your drawing is to use turpentine to literally wash out and remove the drawing from the stone. At this point, you can only see a ghost image of the drawing you made, and this is the grease that has been penetrated into the stone from the first etch. After that, you want to buff in a bit of the printmaking ink onto the stone and let the stone rest for about 5 minutes. After that, we will be using a leather roller to roll up the stone with printmaking ink. We sponge on the surface of the stone and to create a thin layer of water. And this is when the absorbed gum layer is helping to hold on to the water. After you sponge, you want to straight away roll your roller with the printmaking ink onto the stone, which will attract to the grease that is already in the stone, and you can see your image building up again. After you have rolled off your stone, it's time to do the second etch. The second etch helps to really establish the absorbed gum layer to make sure that the stone is not sensitive to grease anymore. The second etch works in the same way as the first etch. You apply gum arabic onto the stone, and you're also applying gum arabic mixed with nitric acid onto the stone. After you've done your second etch, you also want your stone to rest for at least an hour. But then, after the stone been resting, you can start printing your stone. To print your stone, you need to have a special lithography press. You place your stone on the press and you adjust the pressure for that stone, because all stone got different thickness. Then you want to wash out the ink that you have on the stone. You use turps, wash it out, buff in the ink you will be printing with, and then you roll up the stone in the same way as you do when you're rolling up to prepare it for the second etch. When you get the right blackness of the stone, you can start pulling prints. And between every paper you need to re-ink your stone, and when your prints start to get grey, you need to add more ink to your roller as well.
There's a lot of process just to make a stupid drawing, right? So when I told you that this is very process intense technique, I wasn't lying, right? So printmaking is just, sometimes it takes more just to prepare your matrix to print than actually make a drawing. So a lot of times the printmakers really accentuate their process and then translate that into their own creative activity and creative artifact. So yeah. Alright, so that's planographic lithography technique. And next we're gonna take a look at is stencil technique. So the last category of the four major printmaking. So the most widely used stencil technique is screen printing, and screen printing is probably one of the most common type of printmaking that we see and we interact on a daily basis. So the screen is a fine mesh or silk. Traditionally it's been silk, or these days synthetic fiber mounted in a frame, rather like a window screen. So a lot of times it's wood or aluminum. So to understand the basic principle of screen printing, you need only picture the lettering stencils used by school children. So the stencil is a piece of cardboard from which the forms of the alphabet letters have been cut out. So to trace the letter onto paper, you simply place the stencil over the paper and fill in the holes with the pencil or ink. So of course, for professional screen printing, there are a lot more process involved, and it is often very tedious, and you have to be very precise and accurate to create a good work. And screen printing is widely used in commercial world, so that's why I said this screen printing is probably the most common type of printmaking that we encounter. So most clothing that you are wearing that has like some kind of graphic on is printed with screen printing. And this infamous Obama poster was screen printed by an American artist, Shepard Fairey, who now owns a street fashion clothing line called Obey. And he used to print that graphic onto t-shirts.
One of the basic concepts behind printmaking is to create a consistent edition of prints, as opposed to a painting where each one is unique.
In screen printing, we use a variety of techniques to create a stencil on a screen, then push ink through the mesh, printing colors one at a time in order to make multiples of the same image. You can use your own art to create fun, functional things, expressing your unique perspective while also having a consistent result. First, you'll need to create a stencil. This can be done a couple of ways. If you're doing this at home, you can create a traditional stencil cut from paper. Just be sure to use something sturdy, not too thick. Thin paper will fall apart when it gets wet, and cardstock is too thick and will allow the ink to get between the paper and the screen and muddy up your design. I'd suggest using freezer paper or the adhesive paper used to line cabinets. We use a photo emulsion method, which is the most accurate way to reproduce your image exactly the way you created it and is common in the screen printing industry. With practice, this can also be done at home. First, a transparency is created using your custom artwork, then light-sensitive emulsion is coated onto a screen, dried in the dark, and then exposed to light. Once exposed, the unexposed emulsion is washed away, leaving behind the stencil. We then use a squeegee to push ink through the stencil onto our finished piece.
Screen printing is really versatile because, as we like to say, if it's flat and doesn't move, you can print on it. It's widely used for posters and t-shirts, but you can also print on wood, even metal. As you can imagine, we screen just about everything we can inside our studio, including most of our signage. So whatever you're using, just be sure you use the right ink for the material, and be mindful that any texture or uneven surface will be tricky to do. I tend to do most of the poster printing, where Nikki focuses on fabric. I think it has to do with the length of our arms. They each have their own considerations at each stage of the process, so we'll talk about this as we go along using two of our recent designs, our resident robot mascot and a colorful sugar skull.
Alright, so that is how stencil technique works. Alright, so that is it for today's lecture. So like I said, I want to make it a little bit shorter so that you guys have more time to study for the second exam. So make sure that you find all the answers to the study guide and then have it right next to you when you take the exam. And if you have any question on study guide, email me as soon as possible, because if you email me around like a Friday night, try to like find an answer for one question that you just cannot find an answer for, chances are you're not going to get it by the time before the exam closes. So make sure to take the exam as soon as possible, and so that you can avoid any kind of a trouble, like a broken computer, unstable Wi-Fi, you know, dog eating a chewing your laptop, or whatever it is. Alright, so I'll see you guys in the next video.